Hey everyone, this is Mark Cunningham, and I am hosting this week. Taylor's on vacation, and then Justin got sick real quick before him and Stephanie were supposed to do it. So we have two substitutes today with me and Ron. So welcome our policy director, Ron Schultes.
Thanks, Mark. I think this B team is going to prove that we should be the real A team. So
yeah, I feel like we're like the replacements, right? Like I feel like the movie, The Replacements. We'll go and beat them. That's perfect.
Right.
I think that Justin and Stephanie are honestly the C team. I just feel like they were elevated for 1 week, but now Justin kind of blew it with his sickness. So
got sent back down to the minors.
That's right. Yeah. And this is the first. So I've never actually hosted before. I usually have Taylor do the questions and I answer. So when this is terrible, that's the reason why. So don't blame Ron. Blame me on that. Ron, the facial hair looks good too.
Well, it's a late night watching session last night. So I didn't wake up early enough to shave. So I don't know. We'll see. We might keep it a little bit longer. Who knows?
So I think you did this show about a year ago. And I think since then, if you don't recognize him, you probably lost like 100 pounds. So I know it's an exaggeration, but you've lost a lot of weight since the last time you've been on here.
Yeah, it's true. I had to lose some weight for surgery literally right at the beginning of the year. Put some of it back on just due to eating unhealthy during session, but we'll get that back off. But yeah, overall, I've lost quite a bit. So.
Well, looking good. So let's start here by talking about the topic that we've talked about for probably the last year and a half, which is COVID. An interesting development over really the past 2 weeks has happened where some of these liberal leaning commentators and magazines are starting to hit the left and saying, you are the ones who are not being scientific about this. Now, Bill Maher went on this rant on this show, basically talking about like how DeSantis and Abbott have been the best governors. And of course, he's a diehard liberal because they're the ones that aren't coming up with crazy rules that mean nothing. There was a great Atlantic article saying that there's kind of, which is another liberal magazine, saying that the anti-science people are the left right now, saying you can't go outside, you have to like double mask outside, kids can't go to school. So has this been surprising seeing how this has worked? We're kind of at the beginning, the right was considered the anti-science, but now it's really flipped and even the left are turning on their own.
Well, I think the key point that you made was we're finally starting to see the divide between liberal and left, right? I think that's the main thing is for the, usually I think they kind of go along together, but now that this has gone on for so long, you're really starting to see the cracks. And so it's just going to be really interesting to see who's a true, like in the old sense of the word liberal versus who's on like a leftist. And that's what I think what we're seeing a lot right now is people like Bill Maher, like, no, you're doing exactly what we have criticized the right of for the past year and a half now of being anti-science. Like there's literally no reason why you can't be outside nowadays if you're fully vaccinated without a mask, or like schools, you're seeing a lot of the cracks around schools reopening. So I think that's been the big surprise is we're now finally starting to see those divisions come about.
And just maybe the honest brokers. I mean, there's people who are left who are very far left who's like, well, look, like I believe in science and I believe it on social. They might believe in all these other terms. And they're like, we need to be honest about this, right? We can't just lie. And because we thought that the idea that I read in the Atlantic was it's just kind of reflexively anti-Trump. So if Trump says open schools, we say don't open schools. Like I mean, he's right about some things. You can say what you want about him, but he is right. And somehow Bill Maher has become like my favorite political commentator in the past year. It's crazy. I think he's funny. My dad still hates him, but I like him.
Well, I mean, you're right. It's just it's the politicization of everything, right? I mean, it was for the longest time, no matter what, if this is what Trump said, this is what we have to do the opposite. Well, he's gone now. And so now you actually have to stand on policies, not just anti somebody. And you're starting to see those cracks, which is, I think, a good thing.
Yeah, and they're still trying to go with the anti-Trump thing. I'm just not sure it'll work. I mean, I feel like this is exactly what happened with the George W. Bush thing, and then 2010 happened, and they got crushed. So we'll see.
Right. Well, I mean, it just goes to show you, like, what was it? The congresswoman from New York blamed Trump that, like, New York is losing a congressional seat. Did you see that?
Yeah, which is just insane. It's like it's like the people who need to go to a mental institution who say stuff like that. Like, how do you even do that?
Right. I mean, you could even argue that I think it was like only by like 90 people. Well, I mean, your COVID deaths caused you to lose a congressional seat, not Trump. So.
Oh yeah. The nursing homes. I'm pretty sure that's why. Exactly. That's why you don't.
Right.
Okay, so let's move on to another kind of political policy topic, but it's going to be in the state of Tennessee. So, Beacon Impact and you have been up there all session. You've been working hard, and session just ended yesterday, correct?
That's right.
So we were there. So tell us some of the takeaways. I know that one of the big things that Beacon Impact worked on specifically was right to work and being on the constitutional. So talk about some of your takeaways, session takeaways, some of the important things that you think happened.
Well, you started with the biggest one was right to work, keeping the process and to put that in our state's constitution. So We passed it by a simple majority in 2020. So how the process works here, you have to pass it in 2 years. The second year, you have to pass it by a supermajority. And so we did it literally like in the last week. We got 67 of the 66 votes we needed. So it was razor thin, but it's a high bar. And it should be anytime you're talking about changing the Constitution, right? I mean, it should be a high bar to change that. But we were able to show that, one, this is something that we can do to push back against Washington. It's good for our state's economy and protecting the right of whether or not you want to choose to join a union or not, for generations to come. So it's a huge win that will now go on the ballot in 2022 for voters to decide. And so that's really all the legislature was doing, was giving voters the choice to do that, the opportunity to do so. And so we're really excited about that. And had we not, it would have been until 2026 until we would have been able to, because of how the process works. So it was a big hurdle and a huge win for us, and we think the state.
And just to be clear, when you say us, I mean, what you mean is Beacon Impact, which is the lobbying arm of Beacon Center. So, I mean, that's kind of our policy lobbying arm. And that's a big deal, because anytime that you can put something on the ballot, it's like you're not even you're not saying this has to go in the Constitution. You're saying you guys can decide this goes in the Constitution, right? It's not pushing something through. It's we'll let Tennesseans decide it, which I think is generally a good thing when you can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on some other issues that we saw a lot of work around was going back to COVID, right? What are some of the things that we learned from COVID? And so reforming like emergency powers. So for example, in some of the counties that have their own independent health boards, they could create health orders without any kind of approval from like the county mayor that come with criminal penalties. So you have unelected bureaucrats essentially being able to create criminal penalties without any accountability. So that's going to be changing.
Look, I want to do that. I want to create penalties without anything.
Right.
I mean, I'm an elected, right? If you don't like the Jazz, 10 days in jail.
Classy misdemeanor right there. Exactly. You don't like the Jazz. So that's it. I mean, that's a big deal. And so that's a huge win. Another one is local governments won't be able to create like designations of essential versus non-essential. This is something that Beacon talked a lot about, was every Tennessean's job is essential. And so if a business can reopen safely and follow health protocols, who cares what industry they're in? They should be able to open and operate. And so that they'll be allowed to do that going forward. So you saw a lot of reform around that. Another one that kind of flew under the radar that we are super excited about is essentially preempting around online platforms. We're going to be the first state in the country to do this, to make sure like services like Etsy, Instacart, Uber Eats, Uber, any type of online marketplace where you're connecting a buyer and then a seller of a good or service, that can only be regulated. The operation of it can only be regulated at the state level. So we've seen like when new technologies come out, right? When Uber came out, taxis tried to have them banned, at the city, local level, especially around like airports. That's not going to be allowed for whatever that next Uber is. So that's a really big one. We don't know what that next platform will be, but we've already got the structure in place to make sure that they can launch easily.
And let me ask you a question. So that's about uniformity too, right? So it's like if you
Right.
have a new thing, if you're in Memphis and you have to go to Nashville, it's a completely different law. I mean, that's problematic for somebody who's trying to do that. And then separately, if you have, new, and I think this is probably one of the reasons that is important, but if you have these laws that don't really apply to new technologies, but kind of cities try to overregulate and apply that can
Right.
really kill industry, right?
Yeah. Imagine if you're like trying to be an Instacart driver, right? Or an Uber driver, and you have to follow a whole patchwork every time you cross a different county. I mean, that's impossible to operate like that. So that way, when you have that uniformity for that next platform, whenever they come in, right, it makes it a lot easier for them to start, and also for the providers too. I mean, these are people who, especially during COVID, a lot of people lost their jobs, can rely on that income from being able to do that side hustle, and so whatever that next side hustle is, it's going to only be, you're going to have one set of rules for the whole state, which is a really big deal.
Awesome. So let's move on to a fun topic, since it sounds like the session was great, but, and when I say fun, I mean, probably not fun for you, but at least one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the NFL, maybe, top 5 NFL history, Aaron Rodgers, has, and I guess he's not said it yet, but a lot of rumors that said that he wants out. There you go. There's the Packers thing, that he wants out of Green Bay. Didn't really give a reason. Just was unhappy with, I think, the GM, and thought that he was kind of ruining this team. I mean, drafting a quarterback who wasn't good last year was probably part of the reason instead of receiver. Right. But I've actually seen sports media kind of hit him and say, he's kind of being a crybaby right now. Like I've actually seen a number of things who normally I feel like side with the players in these things where like the player wants out, have been like, no, Rodgers is acting like a child right now. What are your thoughts? Does Rodgers, is it fair that he wants out? Is it a fair request? Or do you think it's kind of him being a child?
So I will first of all say that Aaron Rodgers definitely, as a lifelong Packer fan, like I'm a shareholder, all that, like huge Packer fan. He definitely can be a drama queen, a little prickly, and definitely holds grudges. Like there's no doubt about that. But I think if you haven't followed the Packers for years, like you may just think, oh, this is something that's been recent, but this has been going on for quite a while. Like they randomly fired like his quarterback coach, which, if you're a quarterback, that's the guy you work with on a day-to-day basis. And they didn't even ask him. They're just like, hey, we're firing him. And he's like, are you kidding me? You didn't ask like if I thought he should be fired.
Which again, but he's also not the coach. He gets paid $1 million to be the quarterback. I understand why you'd want his input, but that's not part of his job description.
Sure. It doesn't have to be his final decision, but I think it's one of the, like, you didn't even talk to me about it to get my thoughts first, right? Like, or his favorite target for many years was Jordy Nelson, and he really wanted him to be resigned. They didn't do that.
Which is a smart decision because he fell off a cliff after that too.
Sure. But I think the whole point is like, you haven't at least gotten my input, then of course you had the whole Jordan Love pick last year. So not only people like to say, oh, it's just like the Brett Favre situation. It's totally different. Brett Favre was always talking about retiring. Aaron Rodgers has said he wants to play into his 40s, never given any indication that he wants to walk away. Aaron Rodgers fell in the draft, whereas they traded up to get him. So not only did they use the first pick, they gave up a 4th round pick to get him. So it's a completely different scenario. Oh, and by the way, you didn't let him know when like it came out in the news that Andy Dalton, who hasn't even played a down for the Chicago Bears, they called him to let him know, hey, we're going to be drafting Justin Fields, but you are definitely our starter day one. So even a guy who hasn't played for the organization got a heads up this is a guy, let's be frank, if it wasn't for him, we would not be very good. It's for many years, the Packers were considered at least a contender just because of Aaron Rodgers. And so you didn't I think that's the whole thing. He just feels disrespected. Maybe, I don't know what I think there's a lot of smoke about what his actual demands are. I think,
And that's the thing, like until he actually says something specific to the media, all rumors. So you do want to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. And maybe he told somebody, an NFL reporter, he was unhappy, but that's not the same thing as saying, I want out for sure.
Exactly. I think it could just be a leverage play to could be, hey, if you trade Jordan Love and extend me for 2 years, I'm good. Like, guarantee me that I can retire as a Packer, which is what he said he wants to do his whole time. So I don't know. I
think I'm on the different side. It sounds like you're kind of, it just seems to me like, they drafted Jordan Love as the future. What did Rodgers got drafted while Favre was still there? And what was it, 3 years until he actually played it down?
Right.
In 3 years, Rodgers going to talk about retiring anyway. So I don't understand why, drafting a potential heir apparent once you're done. And if he keeps playing this way, there's no way they can bench him or trade him. He's playing too well.
Yeah, I'm still in the Rodgers camp on this one. I say, like I said, Favre was talking about retiring and he kept going back and forth. Rodgers hasn't done that. And I think the other thing, too, is when you talk about the future, well, what is the future anymore? 4 or 5 years? Like Aaron Rodgers still could be playing in a high level 4 or 5 years from now. Look at Tom Brady. He's 43. Aaron Rodgers is 37. So the long term can still be Aaron Rodgers. It just depends. And with how, how the contracts work nowadays, like with a rookie quarterback, you have to utilize that first contract, which basically means after this year, they plan to move on from him. So that's the writing was on the wall. And so Aaron Rodgers is using his leverage of playing like an MVP this past year. So
I think if he ends up going to San Francisco or Denver, he's going to have a hard time he's not going to realize that how good Devontae Adams really is until he has to go somewhere else and how much he'll miss him. But it'll be interesting to see this. And we got a whole Packers segment, so I'm glad that we got to do this there. And hopefully it works out for you. I mean, hopefully they figure it out and he stays. And again, you never, I mean, how many media reports have been wrong or being misconstrued in the history of sports? I mean, at least
I will have to take, I will, you can just put it in like, if he's going to be traded, it's going to be like right after June 1st, just because of how the cap works. Like I'm thinking about putting in like, you know, a PTO request for June 2nd, just to be safe. I know.
So one more question though. Look at the betting lines. Does he start the season with the Packers? Yes or no? I think the odds are that he's a slight favorite to start somewhere else. Will he start the first game for the Packers?
I think he's gone personally. I hope that doesn't, you know, be the case, because as you pointed out, like if it's about winning, the best team for him to win on right now is in fact Green Bay.
Yep.
Right. It's just the personal issues. But I mean, if anything, he holds a grudge, and I think he's just not going to budge on this because he thinks he can turn any team into a winner, which, you know, certainly can make any team into a contender, I believe. But we're built to win now. I mean, that's just what it is. So
no for this. So I think you can bet on that. I think it's like -120 if you want that. So. Yeah. Our last topic, it's an interesting one. It's kind of been a lot of Instagram stuff. I don't know if you're on there. I kind of only understand the memes a little bit, but Bill Gates got divorced from his wife, Melinda Gates, of 27 years, which actually has a huge impact kind of on the philanthropic world because of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I guess I don't pay attention to much, but it seems surprising when people get divorced after that long. I mean, 27 years seems like a long time. So to me, I was like really shocked. I'm like, wow, they're old. You know, I'm surprised they've been together. They seem happy, I guess, from what I've seen. But it got me to thinking, not just about them, but about Hollywood generally, or people who are famous. And the most surprising divorces we've seen. So of course we're all on the outside. We don't know the internal thing, but sometimes you're like, oh yeah, like Kanye and Kim Kardashian, maybe not surprising, you know, Tiger Woods and Ellen Norgren, not surprising based on what happened. But like, so there's these ones that you're like, okay, of course that's going to happen. Jennifer Lopez and anybody, not surprising. But now we're at this point, we're like, that's a surprising one. And sometimes you see these couples that seem so happy, then they get divorced and you're just kind of surprised. So Ron, what is your most surprising kind of, it can be a famous divorce, it can be Hollywood music, but where you're like, wow, I'm really surprised they didn't make it.
Yeah, I mean, so in full disclosure, I'm not the biggest like celebrity news follower. So, but I think I would have to say Brad and Angelina, right? I mean,
that's a good one.
Brad Jelena, right? I mean, they created a whole term around this. I mean, and they were married for forever in terms of Hollywood years. I mean, they adopted like, I don't even know how many kids together.
Yeah.
Right. So I would, you know, you would think that would, if you were willing to like adopt, I think it's like at least 4 or 5 kids together, right? That you would have to have a pretty strong relationship to want to, you know, bring on that responsibility. It doesn't matter how rich you are. I mean, children are a responsibility, right? And especially when you're taking on, you know, other kids, you know, through adoption. So I think that one certainly surprised me. I mean, they were like the A-list couple. I mean, you had a whole term for them just because of how strong they were, you know, and
that was they probably were married. I don't know the number, but I'm guessing like 10 years at least. I mean, they were together for a while.
Yeah. So I think that one has to be up there as one of the most surprising ones.
Okay, I'll give you that one. Actually, that's a pretty good one. I didn't actually think of that one. So mine, I always think of, and these are like the Channing Tatum. Do you know him and his wife, like Jenna Dewan? They just see, I mean, they're in movies together, and like every time you see them on interviews and stuff, and they seem so happy. And it's like, especially when there's not a clear event, like I guess if there's cheating or something like that, you get it. But it just seemed like, you know, they kind of grew apart, and that was the same thing with Chris Pratt and Anna Faris. Like those are people who, in my mind, you can only see so much, but they seem happy.
Right.
But I mean, then just, you know, so many, I mean, you see all these other people and it's like, well, they were happy, but this guy was actually gay. I mean, you saw Jimmy Greavy, like there's a lot of weird things that come out that you just really, it just shows you don't really know the inside of people's relationships. And some people who you keep, it's like every year, it's like, oh, Kanye and Kim lasted a lot longer than I thought. It's like every year, it's like, absolutely. Oh yeah, I'm like, I thought they were getting divorced after 6 months. I mean, she married Chris Humphries for like 34 days. So you just kept expecting them to get divorced. And it's like, they actually lasted a lot longer than I expected. And did you ever watch The Hills, that awful MTV show?
No, I did not.
Well, good for you. They like, have you ever heard of Spencer and Heidi? They were like these.
Yeah.
Okay. So they seem like the worst. Like they were like, oh, they're getting divorced. I just saw they celebrated the 15th anniversary yesterday.
Yeah. So there's like, sometimes, you know, you have, there's that joke of like, when they're fighting a lot, there's a lot of like chemistry, just, you know, passion. They just make it work somehow. I guess that can be true, you know, where it's those silent couples, You never know. I mean,
I
who knows?
guess so. But yeah, but that is weird. It's funny to think it shows you how little we actually know about celebrities' lives, but it's fun to talk about. So, well, Ron, first time in a year, we're glad that you came back on with us. I think it was I think it was a successful thing. We will definitely, Stephanie and Justin are already kind of talking trash in their little chat about how good they think they are, and how much better they think they're going to do than us. So I think I'll respectfully disagree, but we'll see what happens next week.
We'll see.
Well, thanks for
Awesome.
joining us, Ron. We appreciate it.
Thanks.